Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex. This week it's following the Hungarian Grand Prix. We're going to wrap that race up for you. We've got the mid-season break to look forward to as well, finally. Get a bit of a break from all the racing. But yeah, we've had 8 races in 10 weeks basically, and this Hungarian Grand Prix was the end of that. And where do we begin? Probably not the outcome we were hoping for, but nevertheless still a very critical race as far as the championship is concerned. So, as always, I'm Jawad, joined by Baden, and Hungary, 6th Grand Prix win for Lewis Hamilton in Hungary, dominated the race from pole. Unlikely result, obviously, because we thought Ferrari would strike back after Germany, but because of the wet qualifying that we had on Saturday and the front row lockout for Mercedes, it was basically all for them there to win on Sunday.
It must be said, the way that weekend panned out, thank God that it's coincided with the 4-week break. I think after what happened a week earlier at Germany, everyone was really a bit deflated from what we saw, that promise of Ferrari stealing a march, and it just went completely pear-shaped. So we reflect on Mercedes there, kudos to them, and to Hamilton. They've really seized that initiative, and Ferrari has to regather itself very quickly because, as we've mentioned numerous times, this was the point of the season where it all just imploded for them 12 months ago.
Yeah, it was 12 months ago indeed, and perhaps more so the second half of the season after the break. But as far as Hungary, the race itself is concerned, so Mercedes win. They've won back-to-back races, obviously, from Germany and now Hungary with Lewis Hamilton. And for the race itself, what ultimately unfolded for Sebastian Vettel was that slow pit stop. That was probably the defining moment of the race. The fact that, he exited behind Valtteri Bottas, lost that position, and then basically holed up behind Bottas until lap 65, where ultimately there was contact when Seb got past at turn 3.
And then he blocked Bottas, and clearly he was lucky not to get a penalty, if you believe the Sky crew.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it was all Vettel's fault, basically. So, he should
have
been
not to be cynical.
Given a 10-second penalty or just disqualified from the race for that if Martin Brundle was, say, the head steward. Hopefully he never gets to that position one day. But so that was basically the defining moment of the race when that pit stop ruined Seb's race. And then basically until lap 65, we know Hungary's a notoriously bad track for overtaking, but given the fact that his car had the better tyres, it was a stronger car, he just couldn't get past Bottas. And then it got to the stage where Kimi Räikkönen ended up following his teammate, and it was like, well, do Ferrari give Kimi the opportunity to get past Bottas, and at least is there enough laps left to perhaps have Kimi push for the win or something? But unfortunately that didn't happen. In the end they didn't get Kimi to pass Seb, but they both got on the podium in the end, with Bottas dropping to 4th, and then of course being wounded. He had front wing damage on the penultimate lap. We saw Daniel Ricciardo trying to get past him at turn 1, but because of the understeer, Bottas almost took Ricciardo out of the race. And so he was given a 10-second penalty, even though he finished 5th. It didn't really change his position in the end, so a bit of a pointless penalty, you could say. But for Bottas, it really unfolded as well. So a terrible, terrible race for him. And we'll talk more about that later with the comments that came after the race as far as his position in the team, the wingman referred to by Toto Wolff. So, it wasn't a good race for Ferrari and for Valtteri Bottas either.
You got to feel for all of them. Again, without paying out too much on Hamilton, it's really fallen into his lap the past fortnight, and kudos to him for being in position. But it's hard not to look at that first half of the season and you see these critical moments. He always seems to be the benefactor, and the rest of them get screwed over, none more so than Bottas. Vettel's perhaps been a little bit hasty and desperate, and it's not always paid off. And this time, coupled with that pit stop, and we saw him being delayed behind Carlos Sainz, I believe, for 9 blue flags, they said, before the Spaniard got the message. Maybe some retribution for the Austria hold up in qualifying. Who knows there? But you can imagine the frustration from Vettel and then from Bottas being consigned into that rear gunner role, and then he gets a little bit clumsy with that late braking into Ricciardo, and you can't really hold it against him, and you've just got to hope that his morale doesn't sag in the second half of the season when you hear what Toto Wolff did say afterwards.
Yeah, and the fact that given in Germany we already talked about how at the end of the race he was in the faster car, he had the better tyres, yet Mercedes wanted him to hold station, so they could have easily given Bottas the win, or he could have taken it fair and square, but at the same time, then this time they left him out, you could say, on those tyres. They didn't give him a second pit stop like they did for the Ferrari. So perhaps Bottas could have been quicker, he would have been quicker. Perhaps he could have scored the podium, let me rephrase myself, if they had pitted him that second time, but they didn't. So in a way, I certainly felt like Mercedes left. We talked about Ferrari leaving Kimi Räikkönen out to dry many occasions this season. I felt that, Mercedes left Bottas out to dry this time just to protect Hamilton's lead, but ultimately cost themselves 2 cars on the podium through that.
Oh, it's at a stage, even as we've seen with Ferrari, it doesn't matter how competitive this notional second driver may be. They're happy to see them relegated to third, or dare we say as low as fifth, just for the sake of Hamilton or Vettel to perhaps have a win. So you can see that 1-2s are very secondary to getting their leading drivers, even though they're really on merit. You can see that more so Bottas and Raikkonen, but both of them have had pretty decent campaigns, certainly an improvement on last season, but they're just not being given a hope at all of contending unless the other two are out of the equation.
And Bottas as well just has had such rotten luck this season, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it when we recap the first half of the season in a week's time, but yeah, it's just another unfortunate thing. And then of course, he's right to say that he's hurt by the comments of his boss afterwards, that he feels like he's just been consigned into this wingman role. So yeah, not something Bottas would want, especially after last year he won 3 Grand Prix. You would have thought he'd be in championship contention, but he's more than 80 points behind now, and it's pretty much over for him this season. But moving it on anyway to Red Bull then, of course. So Daniel Ricciardo ended up finishing 4th ahead of Bottas. It was a power unit related retirement for Max Verstappen, and I guess the
Has
outburst...
it been every race this season one Red Bull's had a failure? That's what it feels like.
It feels like that, yeah. We've not had Red Bull finish, they've been strong at a few races, but it's always one or the other car that's up there. So Daniel Ricciardo scores 4th, and then Max Verstappen's out, and I guess the outburst that he had on the radio over Renault's reliability said it all, that even though they're breaking up next year, it's still frustrating that they can't get the results that they want.
I think, for Verstappen, it's hard not to empathise when he's had that turnaround in form since his skirmishes earlier on, and Daniel Ricciardo's been in a bit of malaise since that win at Monaco, so it was good for him to bank 4th, but you can see that potential coming into the weekend. They'd be both bitterly frustrated when we thought they might have had the best car on that circuit, and to come away with only a minor placing just illustrates where they're at, and they really just can't get to 2019 fast enough.
Yeah, what does the future hold for them with Honda as well, switching from Renault? But yeah, it's just a big question mark over the Renault reliability. Seriously, at this stage, we didn't think that they would still be in this situation where, each race they're having a power unit failure. Now, last time out in Germany, of course, Daniel Ricciardo had to take all those penalties to get a new power unit in, and then lo and behold, he has a engine failure in the race, which takes him out. So, are they going to have to take more penalties as the year goes on because they've exceeded that maximum of 3? Can they win another race before the year's out as well? Because certainly we thought in Hungary they'd be strong because it's a circuit that doesn't rely so much on the power, and their chassis has been strong as we saw in Monaco, but just the reliability side wasn't there for them this time. So who knows if they'll, say, come Singapore or Suzuka, will they get the chance to be able to show their hand and perhaps go for the win, or will this problem continuously hamper their chances?
It's hard to see it really coming good for them at all. Ever since that decision to sever ties with Renault, it's almost like last year with Toro Rosso, things got very ugly very quickly, and now there's no holds barred between the Red Bull camp and Renault. It seems as though any civility's really been dispensed with, and who knows whether Renault's going to hold back in giving them prioritised parts and go more so towards McLaren or any longer term customers. So for Red Bull, it could be a case of just relying on things not going bust, and then I don't know, another victory. It seems like as much as they've really up till where was it when Verstappen won at Austria, they were right in the hunt to win once every 2 or 3 weekends, and now they're feeling like they're just well adrift, just purely because of reliability, not for a lack of pace on the car itself.
Yeah, it's just, I didn't really think we'd still be talking about Renault reliability at this point of the season, given that Red Bull have already won 3 races this year with both their drivers. I mean, Red Bull, here's a stat for you. Red Bull's the only team who've had both their drivers win races this year. Ferrari, they've won 4 races. Mercedes have won 5 races, but it's all between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton. So there you go. Red Bull with both Verstappen and Ricciardo have won races this season, yet, you know, we're in that position where the reliability isn't there. Pierre Gasly for Toro Rosso, he finished 6th after he capitalised on a Q3 appearance. Both Toro Rossos got into Q3 because of the weather on Saturday. Unfortunately for Brendan Hartley, he couldn't get into the points. He finished 11th, just outside there, but another solid result there for Gasly, and he was the only guy outside of those top 5 drivers to not be lapped. So, you know, in that Toro Rosso, great drive from him again, like Bahrain. Behind him then we had both Haas cars in the points too, 7th for Magnussen, 10th for Grosjean, and a crucial weekend for them to score because their midfield rivals Force India didn't, so they leapfrogged them again, in the Constructors' Championship. And then for Renault, I guess it would have been a terrible day or terrible feeling for Carlos Sainz because he qualified 5th on Saturday and then, not finished 9th again on Sunday.
Yeah, coupled with those rumours about the merry-go-round relating to Force India, you never know if we come to Belgium and Esteban Ocon's in that second seed, if Force India can't get its act together with the exiting administration in the next few weeks. So there's plenty to play out there, and Carlos Sainz really just emphasising the way that he's not lit the world on fire, and you couple that with that moment where he did hamper Vettel. It wasn't a great look for him, but for Pierre Gasly, you can see he got lucky on the Saturday, but he didn't lose his head on the Sunday there. Obviously, the lack of overtaking opportunities helped his cause, but again, he's putting his foot forward to be that next in line. It probably won't be Carlos Sainz at this point. It's more likely that Gasly's the next cab off the rank once one of the existing Red Bull drivers moves on. It might be a few years away, but he's looking like the most promising out of the last few years. You could say that the Frenchman and even Hartley there, as much as he didn't make another points finish, he's looking like he's really got himself together after especially that shake-up he had at Silverstone. He's bounced back nicely and he's shored up his drive, if nothing else, for the rest of the season without feeling as though a certain Helmut Marko is breathing down his neck.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, the fact that if you go off the rumours that we were hearing in Canada and Barcelona, of course, he wouldn't have been on the grid. This come now anyway, was Brendan Hartley. But going back to Carlos Sainz, just really unfortunate, just dropped places at the start. You said he was holding up Vettel, but then McLaren really ruined Sainz's race too because both their cars, Alonso and Van Dorn, went very long on their opening stints on the soft tyre, and they basically got into the top 10 because they looked after their tyres and were in a great position. But unfortunately, it was bittersweet in the end because Stoffel Van Dorn had a gearbox retirement. I mean, his luck continues to go from bad to worse, and when it's getting to that crucial time of the year where, you know, is he going to be on the grid next year? Will he be replaced? Who will come in, etc., etc.? And to have reliability, of course, it was a gearbox failure in the end that cruelled his chances. If things like that continue to happen, then, you know, it's hard to then give the guy an opportunity. Like, he needs the opportunity in a reliable car to show the results, and when he is going to do that, it just gets taken away from him. But Alonso, again, in the points, solid result for his side. But, that really ruined Renault's race and also for Carlos Sainz.
Who knows, plenty to play out there. That speculation that Sainz could be destined for McLaren at Van Dorn's expense, and the Belgian in turn talk he might surface at Sauber, reuniting him with Fred Vasseur. So there's again more that we'll probably touch on next week, the mid-season review, and it's always the moment where things can get a bit out of hand. But for Van Dorn, it was as competitive as he's been, really. You could almost say this season, at least being in the same airspace as Alonso, and it's just a shame that McLaren, this was one of their better opportunities to be towards the top five, and if ninth is the most that they can pull off, or was it ninth or eighth for Alonso?
Yeah, he was ahead of Sainz.
So eighth, if eighth is as most, and we saw last year they had one of their best results of the year at Hungary, it does make you...
With a Honda engine as well.
Yeah, no less. So the contrast, it's going to be a long final 9 races for them, whoever they decide to settle on. And Alonso, again, I think that deadline came through from Michael Andretti about his commitments in 2019, whether he goes stateside. So he's got a couple of weeks to really ponder whether there's going to be any progress if he sticks around for another season.
Yeah, so deadlines happening everywhere for 2019, but let's stay very much in the present and look at the championship standings then. So who would have thought after Silverstone that we would be going into the mid-season break with Lewis Hamilton holding a 24-point lead in the championship. So at least, Seb scoring second in the end did make a big difference, because it would have been 27 points if he hadn't gotten ahead, and that would have been more than a race win's worth of points to recoup. So at least 24 points gives him that, within a race win, the 25 points you need. So if something does go wrong for Hamilton and Vettel wins a race, then he will be back in front. But it's still a pretty big number now. It's probably the biggest it's been all season long.
It's essentially been a 50-point swing since Vettel crashed out at Hockenheim in terms of what he lost and Hamilton gained to the 7 points he also gets for the victory at Hungary. So you see Vettel there, he probably could have been leading himself by 30 or so, and now he's basically a race win in arrears at circuits where Ferrari was meant to dominate. So it really doesn't bode well, these next two, Belgium and Italy. If Ferrari doesn't win at least one, if not both, it's hard not to be pessimistic that Mercedes will just continue to find ways to jag these victories, and before we know it, we're going to be in the last quarter of the season, let alone the last third, and it doesn't take much, really. You can see Ferrari to have another off weekend and it's going to be almost insurmountable.
Yeah, exactly, and at least in the Constructors' Championship it's a lot closer with just 10 points between Mercedes and Ferrari. But yeah, this is everything up until now, we sort of said, okay, that's fine, but it's what happens after the mid-season break when we get to Spa, to Monza, and then Singapore is where we will watch Ferrari with bated breath, because it was those races last year that
specifically Singapore that
specifically,
pretty much summarised their season.
Lap 1, turn 1, basically, that killed the championship for them. So it's those races that I've been saying all along this season, regardless of how strong they've been in this first half, that those are the races that are going to be critical to this championship. Not that every other race isn't, but it's those races where if they have the pace, that's fair enough, but they need the execution. If they execute in those races, then yeah, we can believe firmly that this could be their championship.
And let's be fair to them, they've been cruelled by the weather twice in a row, and you ally that with even Azerbaijan, again, safety car circumstances. They've had many moments where they've been comfortably ahead, and it's not gone against them, those 1%ers. So it's not as though they're completely messing up, but they do tend to lose their heads when they're forced to think on their feet, and that's where Mercedes seems so brilliant.
Yeah, and it's not like Mercedes haven't been exempt to this either. They've had their moments where they've been exposed, or they've had luck go the wrong way for them. I mean, you look at Austria, for example, double mechanical DNF as well at that. So it's just the way that the championship's gone this year. It's just, you don't really know what's going to happen. 1 minute, one person's leading, the other the next, and then reliability-wise, I mean, we haven't seen Ferrari with reliability issues just yet. So, that's another big question mark to think about for the second half of the season. We've seen Mercedes have their little troubles in Austria, of course, and then they've done some power unit changes, but are Ferrari in a bulletproof position? We don't know yet. So, yeah, that's all to come in the second half of the year. So, yeah, we're really going to look forward to that. But in the meantime, it is nice to have a little bit of a break from F1 just so we can catch up with our sleep a little bit on our Sunday nights. But before we stop talking about Hungary, drivers of the day, easy to say this time it was Daniel Ricciardo, because I didn't mention it before, but he started the race from 12th on the grid because they messed up qualifying in the wet conditions, didn't get out of Q2. And yeah, for him to come back and just the overtakes that he was doing were just, typical Daniel Ricciardo, late on the brakes and just making a real show of it.
Just a nice reminder for him. He's probably been a bit anonymous lately, and it's not as though he's been driving poorly. He's just had very unlucky reliability, much like Max Verstappen did earlier on. And you got to say that when you think about his situation and the way he hasn't even resolved his future beyond this season, it's really intriguing when you consider just how on song he was up to Monaco. It's been a strange sort of half season of two halves there for him, and you do hope that he can get that stability, and whatever happens for the rest of 2018, he knows he's going to be in a good spot moving forward.
Yeah, well, so let's kick off the digest with that and the fact that deadline that we had for Daniel Ricciardo's contract to be renewed, it's well past its due date, and they've revised it to negotiating it in the mid-season break and then perhaps announcing it in Belgium either before the race or on the race weekend. So, what's the delay? You've got to wonder, is there still a chance for him to not be at Red Bull next year, or is that pretty much done and dusted? What are they trying to settle on, whether it's the length of the contract or terms and stuff? It's just,
who knows, maybe a sneaky one in relation to Sergio Marchionne passing. Dare we say, yet could there be a spanner in the works and Ricciardo becomes a player at Ferrari rather than it being a year for Raikkonen and straight into Leclerc? Could it be that Camilleri and Arrivabene have their feelers out for the Australian and he's suddenly back on the radar there?
Well, that's certainly a possibility, not to remiss or whatever. So, yeah, it could be interesting what happens if that sort of gets talked about again. But yeah, it's really hard to see him going anywhere else now except for Red Bull. It just seems that, again, what promised a lot as far as a big name driver perhaps on the move for next year, it's sort of fizzled down to, well, he's going to be staying put, unfortunately, but for how long and what are the terms going to be? Because yeah, with Max Verstappen there, he's got the long-term future. What's the deal with Honda as well? Are they going to be in a position next year to bolster Red Bull further up the order than they already are, to perhaps contesting for championships? Who knows? It's the big question, I guess.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise if Ricciardo, as seems almost certain he does renew at Red Bull, it becomes a 1+1, and that could give him a bit of flexibility into 2020. Who knows? Mercedes with Bottas also on that option, and then even Renault, Nico Hülkenberg out of contract end of 2019. Who knows where Renault will be at in 12 months? So it might be just hedging his bets there and giving himself that opportunity to not be moored to, depending on how competitive Red Bull is with Honda. If it was for 2 seasons, you'd suddenly be on the other side of 30 and with reduced leverage there for his really probably the biggest and most important contract he's going to sign. You'd have to think is going to be, if not this one, the following. Yeah,
well, we certainly thought, say, 2 months ago that this would have been the biggest contract that he would sign, because back then we were like, oh, he's definitely either going to Mercedes or to Ferrari, or, then there was that talk about McLaren and everything as well. But yeah, now it's sort of petered down to the fact that it will be probably staying at Red Bull. But the position that Red Bull are in currently, like at best, people are expecting Red Bull to perhaps just be at the same level competition-wise next year with the Honda power unit than they are this year. So they're not really going to be making much gain. It's just that Honda will have made the gains to get on the level that Renault are currently at. So yeah, and with a competitive Red Bull chassis as well, that's the level they'll be at. So yeah, they're not going to be really competing for regular race wins, are they? Or the championship. So
it does seem again like this fanciful talk of 2021, the revolution that isn't coming to pass, that'll be the next time any team can really penetrate the Mercedes and Ferrari force field that's emerged in the last year or so, and the rest will just be making the most of the chances when the track characteristics suit them.
Yeah, exactly. So enough of that. We had Toto Wolff having to clarify the comments made to Valtteri Bottas about him being the best ever wingman or whatever, and Bottas saying to the media after the race that he felt hurt by the comments, and then of course he had to clarify all that as well. So I guess just it seems like, yeah, inadvertent or a bit too bluntly they said it. You know, we knew that this was sort of the case, as unfortunate as it is, because Bottas is a driver who, let's not forget, who has come to Mercedes after Nico Rosberg retired. There was animosity between Rosberg and Hamilton, and I guess just for the sake of harmony, having a driver that wasn't going to bother Hamilton too much. But at the same time, Bottas's career expectations, he would certainly be hoping that he came to Mercedes to win championships, not to be, say, the Rubens Barrichello of the mob. I'm not going to say Heikki Kovalainen, because at least Bottas is more successful statistically and career-wise than Kovalainen ever was as Lewis Hamilton's teammate. But it's just, yeah, you know, for a driver who's not even 30 yet, who's got so much potential ahead of him, who we earmarked as a champion, let's not forget, a few years ago, it's just unfortunate that he's already been relegated into this position.
And all it takes is a bit of luck going against him, and Mercedes doesn't require any invite to cast him into that support role. It's just a shame that he's always up there and doing the right things, but Hamilton seems to have just literally had the blessed card at his side this season, and that's it. When you look at the driver's standings, he's mathematically really on fumes for his own title bid, so it's understandable now that he's been cast into that rear gunner role.
Yeah, well, more than 80 points behind, as I said before when we were talking about the race, and you know, like all the comparisons that are made between he and Kimi Räikkönen and everything, at least with Räikkönen, I can argue that he's sort of been there and done that. He's achieved at least a world championship. He's won, you know, more than 20 Grand Prix in his career. He's had the success, and he's sort of at the end of his career now. But for someone like Bottas, who is yet to get that success, to achieve all that, it is a bit galling, you could say, that, you know, he's already been relegated into this role. I know that's the way Formula One works. We have our number one drivers, we have our number two, but for a driver that had so much potential around him coming into the sport, it's just very unfortunate.
Maybe a bit of a left field one again, save it particularly for next week, but I could see Bottas surface at Renault in 2020. Esteban Ocon steps up from Renault himself to Mercedes in 2020, and that could be Bottas' opportunity at a manufacturer to lead them into success when they'll just be hitting the sweet spot. And you can think that if he's subjected to more of this really tactic of being the number two, despite being just as good as Hamilton, if not for these things just not falling his way, then you couldn't blame him for moving on, and he's got that option there, so he'd be within his right to exercise it.
Yeah, so that's a very left field thought. I would never have thought of that anyway, but yeah, more to discuss anyway for next week. They didn't stop running at Hungary after the Grand Prix because we had 2 days of testing following that, and of course we had a lot of the young development drivers in the car. Antonio Giovinazzi was fastest for Ferrari on the first day, and then George Russell in the Mercedes fastest on the second day. We saw the debut of the 2019 spec front wings, the simplified wings without all the vanes and aerodynamic devices as they do this year, but also the debut of the psychedelic Williams car, which I thought was kind of cool, all the Flovis paint that they had to put put on their car, all the development that they're doing.
It's as much interest we've had in Williams this season, I think, at
probably,
testing.
Yeah, in a positive way at least, not negatively anyway. And Robert Kubica was behind the wheel of that car as well. So you'd hope that with all that testing that they did do in Hungary over the week, that it is positive. They can take some positives out of it for the future. But yeah, so, that ended there, that test. So, and of course, Bob Bell, to conclude, at Renault, he's stepping back from his role as the chief technical officer to just being a technical advisor. So he's a guy who's been at that Enstone team for quite some time now, and now stepping back, I guess, whether it's anything bigger at play here or not, or is it just his time he wants to step back, who knows.
Oh, he's had 30 years, and it was McLaren and Mercedes, as well as Enstone in various guises as Renault or whatever, or Benetton through the years, and now he's seen them through that formative return. I think it's the right moment for the next generation to see that transition to hopefully the point where they're back in contention for victories in the next year or so.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how things move on there quickly as well, while we're talking about technical staff as well. So with the signing of James Key by McLaren, what was sort of overlooked was the fact that their chief designer for many years, Matt Morris, stepped down as well, which means that McLaren have got effectively no designer for a 2019 car at this stage, because Toro Rosso aren't certainly letting James Key go all of a sudden without some kind of gardening leave or compensation. So yeah, what does that mean for McLaren, already on the back foot for 2019 with no designer there for the car?
I think it means that we're going to be seeing a hasty deal to install a Lando Norris or someone of that ilk at Toro Rosso for next year to smooth the transition to James Key. Otherwise, you'll not be joining McLaren until basically this time next year.
Basically, yeah. So, how are they going to design the car, and, do they just get someone on a temporary contract or whatever, or just, what's the go? So, already on the back foot, you could say, in that respect, but we'll see how things pan out anyway, and talk more McLaren next week when we're on the mid-season review. So let's do our big discussion then for this week, and the big news obviously coming into the Hungarian Grand Prix was Force India and the unfortunate state that they're in, and placed under administration ahead of the Grand Prix in Hungary. Let's talk about that, and also the ramifications to come from it, because there's plenty of fallout, whether it's just for the team or for the sport as a whole. So just giving you some background, I guess, what had happened is Sergio Perez, his wealth of backers, Mercedes-Benz, and of course the water company BWT, which sponsors the team, they all pushed for this to happen, for them to be placed under administration. Now, they were all owed serious amount of money, basically, which hadn't been for X amount of time been paid. And Checo highlighted in a press release saying that, to do this was the best outcome to protect the jobs of the staff, basically to make sure that they get paid their wages and to ensure some kind of future for them at the team or for the team itself. So we saw that Rich Energy, who were long linked with perhaps taking a takeover of Force India, they did a last-minute deal to invest £30 million into the team, but ultimately was not enough to save them from the other investors who were pushing for a resolution.
Just shows how serious it is, and the shambles that it's come to this when there have been legitimate offers in the past. Who knows what the figure has been, but the stubbornness of Vijay Mallya means this is the outcome, and you can't blame Perez and co for taking the action, and it's for the best, as you see, past any sinister motive, selfish nature there, just to recoup their own finances. It's more so to do with the security of the workers there, just to get things moving, instead of having a almost terminal decline to the point where there's absolutely no point of return, and you just hope the next few weeks something is found and they're on the grid come Belgium and beyond, whichever guys that might be, and next season's when they'll really, I guess, emerge with a new identity and someone who's really committed to doing what's best for everyone there, not for their own personal gain. And just really hard not to just be a bit miffed at VJ Malia and co for running the team into the ground despite all they've achieved on track.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head there, basically saying that, despite what they've achieved on track, it just seems, it's unfair that they're in this predicament. In the sense that, certain people are stubborn and they didn't want to bail out when the time was right. And, given the fact that this team is probably one of the best on the grid as far as bang for buck is concerned. Now, they've scored a podium again this year. That came at Baku with Sergio Perez. So, even though they've got rivals ahead of him as far as constructors' points are concerned and overall pace, they still managed to get these results that keep them in that sort of upper echelon of the midfield. And for a team that doesn't invest a whole lot of money into development, into research or whatever, they still get the results, which is the crucial thing in the end. You could spend a whole lot of money on research and development and all these resources, but still not be able to execute, whereas Force India are the opposite. They keep executing but don't have the money to do all that development, and they don't have all those resources. So it would be sad, yeah, indeed, if the whole team had to fold altogether. But, hopefully a resolution has come from this. But as far as, what does the future mean and everything? Well, we heard this week earlier that rival teams are apparently trying to thwart the administrators' efforts to sell the team, and it's all to do with prize money, of course. Is that if they sell the team, it becomes a new entity. It has to then be rewritten into the Concord Agreement, to which they're bound by, and then the prize money, there's a bit of unbalance in that. And this is, we talk about selfishness before with certain individuals. This is now the rival team's selfishness coming in, rather than seeing one of their competitors on the grid there as a benchmark to be able to race against. They'd rather it, if it isn't in our best interest, then, well, stuff them.
Yeah, as much as you can understand a Williams or a McLaren with their recent hardships, they've got to play it from their own well-being, but at the same time, you just feel that what if they were in the same position and they were expecting an olive branch there, and as mainstays, would Force India then return the favour if it ever came to pass? But it seems as though there's no room for sentiment whatsoever, and it's just a shame considering that they have a place on the grid, and whatever the outcome is there, you can see going back to a manner when there were several offers there from the owner at the time, and that one fell through and they fell off the grid just when we thought they were maybe getting their act together. So it's no formality yet that Force India will continue. So it's very much a tedious time these next 3 weeks. A lot to play out, and it changes day by day.
Yeah, it does. And I guess let's quickly talk about what does the future hold as well, as far as the drivers are concerned, and perhaps potential owners, future drivers. So, what happens to Esteban Ocon, and you said it before, he could be in a Renault seat as early as Belgium. So, the fact that, it looks more likely that Ocon will be at Renault next year for sure, for 2019. Who does Checo stay or does he go? The fact that he and his investors pulled the pin on this whole push for the administration thing, means there could be a slight chance that he stays at Force India. I mean, he's been a great asset to the team since he got kicked out of McLaren in 2013. He's been on with the same team ever since, and he's had all those podiums as well to his name. So he'd be a great driver for them to retain. But who comes in now, and this relates to who puts the money into the team. So the Stroll family now have long been linked to this, with Lance Stroll currently at Williams, not doing so well because of the team in their shocking state. Does Lawrence Stroll, the father, take his billions and move his son over to Force India? Certainly gives Lance a better benchmark as well to demonstrate his skill in Formula One. Of course, he's got that podium to his name last year. He had some good results here and there, but this year really hasn't been the greatest because of that Williams car. So does that give Stroll a chance next year? And how about the Mazepin family as well? Because Nikita Mazepin, who's in GP3 at the moment, he's been testing for Force India for about a year now. So, they certainly have the money, and could they want to push young Nikita into the into Formula One and into Force India.
Oh, the Force India and the new owners appreciate oligarchs, then there's every chance that Nikita Mazepin will surface there.
Well, it's not really much an improvement from Vijay Mallya, is it, then, if that's the case?
They're better than a benign despot, you might say, but there's always different shades of characters around the paddock, so nothing will be a surprise if the new owners have their own motives. But I think for Stroll, as much as you can say that he doesn't really justify his place on the grid, it would be nice to see him in a car if Force India had similar competitiveness into next season, and just to see what he can really do when he hasn't got a lump like the Williams has been, really just going backwards ever since he joined.
And alongside Sergio Perez as well, it would be a better benchmark for him. Not that he didn't have that last year with Felipe Massa, but this year alongside poor Sergei Sirotkin, who I guess in that same situation, just in a lump of a car and can't really learn from it. So next year, next to Sergio Perez, if Lance Stroll's in the car, in a car that's proven, I guess, to be a top of the midfield contender, it would be better for Stroll too. So yeah, it's going to be something that we've got to be watching closely over the mid-season break, is how Force India, what the predicament and how it all pans out, and whether there's going to be all these changes for Belgium, whether they're on the grid or not, and whether they have certain drivers moving, Ocon to Renault, etc., etc. So, yeah, it's going to be pretty huge, and just from the sake of competition, for the sake of the sport, we certainly hope that we do have that team on the grid for next year and for the future.
Yeah, 10 teams, I think it's the minimum. Of course, back in the day, they had most frequently 13 on the grid, and it's hard to believe ever getting back to that number. We got close in 2010, and so when we had, I think, the 12 teams, but 10 or 11, I think, anything less than it doesn't seem sustainable without that debate of a third entry for at least, if not all, then some teams. So you do hope that they can continue and they have their place on the grid, and whatever the next chapter is, the new identity, whatever the drivers are, then clearly they're still going to make a contribution.
Yeah, exactly. So more on Force India, I guess, next time when we do our mid-season break. We'll talk more about what they've achieved this year on track, instead of all the off-track dramas that they seem to be embroiled in. But let's wrap things up with our sporting moments of the week. And a couple stood out for me this week, actually, and one of them, once again, is a blooper. We'll start off with that, and that was over in IndyCar land with Alexander Rossi. After winning the race in mid-Ohio, decides to beach his car whilst trying to do burnout. So another little blooper moment. But then I also was pretty taken aback by seeing young Mick Schumacher win his first F3 race, and coincidentally at Spa, the same circuit that his dad had so much success at as well, in Michael winning his first Formula One Grand Prix there. So, good on young Mick for doing that, still in F3, developing away, and perhaps, on the road to F1 in a couple of years' time.
I dare say he'll get more publicity next season when that United European, whatever Italian F3 comes on track with what is currently GP3. When they merge, I'll have quite a strong field. Do you think Mick Schumacher will be in that contention there, so you'll see a lot more coverage of him as part of the Grand Prix weekends itself, and hopefully within 2 or 3 years he'll be in contention for an F1 seat, and hopefully not before his time. He's still got a long way to go, but it's clear that he does have the talent, and that breakthrough will give him a lot of confidence. But
yeah,
I think from that to my sporting moment of the week, again, it's a shame to say it's the dreaded knee, so it's not a good note, and again relating to Collingwood and just the harrowing side of Matthew Scharenberg. Now a third time he's done his knee. Another 12 months on the sidelines beckons, and as a high draft pick for Collingwood 5 years ago, he just can't take a trick, and just when he got that consistency this season, he looked like he really belonged. And as much as Collingwood, they had a gallant defeat to Richmond and a lot of positive signs there, it was hard not to be more deflated by the side of Scharenberg again being really inconsolable, and you just hope that he's got that fortitude to bounce back, like a Nick Naitanui mentioned a few weeks ago. Some of these individuals who have so much to offer, and they just literally, for one reason or another, their bodies just let them down.
Yeah, I think that's the third week in a row you've brought up someone's knee injury. It's not great at all, but I guess, going back to Collingwood, we would have thought that rather than having more players injured now coming to that crucial time of the year, that you'd be getting all those guys at the start of the year that were out coming back to the team to strengthen it. So it's a pretty big loss then when you think about it. But they were talking earlier about Tyson Goldsack being left out again this week, just to wait till he's just right before he comes back, and he's had that long layoff too from injury. So really the coach choosing the time not to risk him again, but to make sure that he's fully fit before the comeback.
It does seem as though for every player that returns, 2 or 3 bite the dust, and a lot of the players that are set to return, they aggravate an injury just as they're about to come back in. So it's at a point where it's a very threadbare lineup, and finals are fast approaching. So if they can't actually just get a team on the park, you wonder what chance they're going to have when it comes down to the pointy end.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty crucial. And then this weekend, of course, with the game against Sydney, you don't want to have 3 consecutive losses now after such a good run in that middle part of the season, which saw you as high as second on the ladder.
Oh, they won last week, of course, between the West Coast game and Richmond, so they're at least still third on the ladder. But if they lost this one, they could fall to as low as 8th. That's how congested it is.
That's how congested it is indeed. So interesting times there. Whereas in NRL land, Cowboys are in the race to avoid the wooden spoon. So
it's progress.
Kind of contrasting tales across both codes for both our teams. But anyway, glad to have a little bit of time away from F1 this weekend. Of course, we've got Sydney's V8 Supercar race, the Super Night event coming up this weekend. Of course, MotoGP comes back as well, so it'd be nice to see something else for a change as well. But just nice to have a little bit of a break. And until we do our little mid-season review, I think that's all that we have time for today.
Absolutely. I think, hard-earned break for both of us and everyone involved in F1. Hopefully their F1's the last thing on their mind.
More so those guys needed more of a break than we do, but the 11 o'clock races are really killing us. But we can't really do much about that except for change our own time zones perhaps. But anyway, thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you guys in our mid-season review.
Till then.